Happy Monday, everybody. All right, this week I want to discuss power. When I say power, you may be thinking to yourself, power as in strength. And while ultimately that is what power leads to, I'm going to start with power at the base level and think when you power on your computer or power on your car or turn on your lights, that's power. That is energy. Energy is what makes the world go round today, and it always has. When the cavemen's created fire, that's energy. It gave them light. You could see in the darkness. If we look back through history, the Mongol Empire, the Mongols rode horses. They were the greatest horsemen. They were able to speed across the European continent and convert the power of the horses into energy that they could use. The Dutch, they converted wind energy into power and turned their mills, their food processing mills or cloth processing mills. They were harnessing power. They built a, a famous financial and military empire. England, they were harnessing coal, leading the Industrial Revolution. Their navies were harnessing wind power, wind energy, and they controlled the seas. They built the largest empire the world had ever seen up to that point. The United States were famous for power. We ended World War II with energy. With the atomic bomb, we harnessed atomic energy. So that's why every nation, every empire is concerned about energy. And Greg has been talking about this with the Middle East and why Iran. If you're not a member of the Middle East, most likely if you're concerned with the outcome, a lot of times it has to do with who's controlling the energy, namely oil, because oil is a famous source of energy in today's world. Well, right now, the United States is in an energy race with China. And China, I have a chart here. I'm going to show you. China has been trying to catch up with the United States, and it has. It's actually beating us in terms of electricity generation. So if you look at this chart, this is uh, energy generation, electricity generation since 1999. And if you see here, this purple line is what the United States is generating. And it's about 4,000 terawatt hours per year. And it's been relatively flat for the last 25 years. Meanwhile, China started out here in the late 90s. In about 2010, they matched the United States. And since then, this is where they're at. They're at 10,000 terawatt hours. So, what is a terawatt hour? Well, 1 terawatt is a lot of energy. That is a lot of electricity. You can run a city about the size of Albuquerque on 1 terawatt hour of electricity. So the United States has 4,000 terawatt hours. China, with 10,000 terawatt hours, has an enormous amount of energy. They could run nations, multiple nations, with that amount of energy. Why do they need so much energy? Well, the demands of energy right now are continuing to grow. The fact the United States is producing the same amount of energy that we produced in the late 90s explains why we now have brownouts and rolling planned brownouts and blackouts in California and in Texas because our grid isn't keeping up with the demands. If you're watching this video, you're watching it on some kind of device that requires energy that probably didn't exist back in the late 90s. Whether it's a flat screen TV, a laptop, or a cell phone, the amount of energy that is growing in demand is almost incomprehensible, especially when you start accounting for artificial intelligence and quantum computing. The energy required to run those is massive. That's where China comes in. They're trying to build energy for everything, not just their citizens, not just so their citizens can turn on the lights, but for everything, including artificial intelligence. How are they generating that electricity? Well, it's been in the news a lot for the last several years. They create massive pollution because they're burning coal, they're burning wood, they're burning anything they can to produce as much energy. But they're not just stopping there. They're going nuclear, they're doing wind energy, they're doing solar energy. They're opening the floodgates to whatever they can do to create energy. The United States, we're starting to try to catch up. And this also includes oil, natural gas, coal, everything you can think of. But the United States needs to get on the ball and start catching up with the amount of energy that China is producing. And that's part of why Trump is, I think, as a president, is very concerned with where energy is flowing right now. But the energy that a nation produces, so it can be used for citizens, keeping businesses open, running homes, for computer technology, like we've discussed, but also military technology. A aircraft carrier, drones, they all, the jets in the Air Force, they all require massive amounts of energy. And so that's why it's imperative. Now, why do we care as investment advisors? Well, when we talk about commodities, there's different groups. You've got food, you've got natural resources, and you've got gold and silver. Well, energy is required for all of those. If you want to extract any of those out of the earth, if you're extracting corn out of the earth, you need tractors. Tractors run on fuel. That's energy. If you're digging rare earth metals out of the earth to turn into solar panels, or if you're extracting oil out of the earth, it all requires energy. And then you can then generate more energy. And our general commodity basket, when we talk about commodities, a lot of times that is looking at things that either produce or support energy. Copper, that's how you transport energy. Aluminum, you transport energy. Steel, you build steel rails, and you can picture big coal trains or trains pulling coal to power plants running on those steel rails. It requires a ton of energy to even produce steel. So, all right, and then you look at gold and silver. Well, silver, there's a lot of silver used in energy, whether it's military weapons or actually capturing energy, like solar panels, converting solar into electricity. Solar panels require a ton of silver. Pulling gold out of the earth requires a lot of energy. So energy affects the prices of all of these things. And as we've seen the price of our hard assets go up in value, a lot of it has been driven by the demand on energy. Everybody wants it. So this is kind of a explanation of why Greg and I are so enthralled with energy. And it doesn't matter what kind of energy, whether it's oil or natural gas or nuclear or wind energy or whatever it is. We're enthralled with it because that's what nations demand, and that's what they fight for, and that's what they then use to expand their territory. So it's very important to us. What does that do for our investments? Well, you've seen what it's done. It pushes the price up because as energy gets more expensive, then the price of goods go up, and the demand for energy is going to keep rising faster and faster. So I hope this was interesting to you. I thought this chart was interesting. If you like this video, give us a thumbs up. I hope you all are preparing for a great 4th of July, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.